All right, so this video is going to talk about APA format just in general first, since it's not something we've talked too much about, and then we're going to go in depth on in-text citations. So to begin with, your first question may be, well, what is APA? APA is an abbreviation for the American Psychological Association. So this is the group who creates the formatting stylistics as well as how to cross-reference sources in papers used in the social sciences. So that's business, economics, psychology, sociology, nursing, OT, all of those different fields are going to use APA format. The most important thing to remember about APA format is that they're parenthetical references which appear within the text is a cross-referencing system to allow readers to find the publication information for that source material, which is of course located on your reference page. So this is really valuable for other people who are reading your papers who are also researching and trying to find those same sources. So there are two things that APA style emphasizes. First of all is the author. And that's just because you're typically writing for people who are also in this field, so they want to be able to see recognizable names of people who are basically the big names in the research area. The second piece of information that's emphasized is the date. And that's because the date of the research says important information about the source's credibility as well as about your researching skills as the author. Okay, so it tells the reader how current the source is, so how relevant and up-to-date the information is. And it also talks about how well you did in your research. So for example, if there had been a huge major change in your field and you didn't mention that change or you didn't have any sources that kind of referenced that, that's going to cause some questions in your readers' minds about your skills as a researcher and your credibility as the writer. Okay, so that's why those things are there. They're very important in terms of kind of increasing the credibility and the power of your paper. So just a couple general formatting tips. You can definitely read more about this in your book, and you can see a very excellent example of how to format things in the Purdue OWL. They have a great sample paper. Your paper should be typed double-spaced on standard-sized paper. All the margins on the paper should be 1 inch all around. You're going to use 12-point Times New Roman font, and you want to include a running page header in the upper left-hand side of every page and a page number in the upper right-hand side of every page. So again, check out the Purdue OWL for that. You can just type Purdue OWL in any browser search bar and it should come right up. It is the most used source for any questions about APA stylistics, citations, references, things like that. All right, so let's dig into the in-text citations. So if we keep in mind that APA values names and dates, it makes sense that whenever you use a source that you would put that information in the parentheses. So in those parentheses, you're always going to have the author's name and the date of the publication. If you're doing a direct quotation, and this will come later whenever you are working in the actual paper itself, you're going to also include a page number where they found that. And that's just going to kind of create a map for your reader to follow to your reference page and then from there to the source itself so that they can find out a little bit more and read a little bit more. Okay, so to look at this through some examples, we can see a reference page entry paired with an in-text citation. In the first example, we do have a source with an author. So the first two pieces of information are the author and the year, which of course matches up with the importance of the names and the dates that we talked about. So those same two pieces of information are then translated into the in-text citation. Note that you don't have the initials of the author. You just have the last name. So we have Coleman, 2005 for our in-text citation. In our second example, we have a source without an author. So when there's no author, you put the title of the source first. So what we've done is we've used that first piece of information, which is the title of the source, in our in-text citation. Note that we've just used the first word or two. You don't want to have your in-text citations be too long, so you can typically get away with the first 1 or 2 or 3 words that are on your reference page. And also note that it is in quotations in your in-text citation. When you type it, it's going to be all black text. You won't have the blue and the red. I just did that for kind of connection purposes in this presentation, but you'll have it in quotation marks because article titles in text as well as in-text citations will have them article titles in the quotes. Okay, so it's important to remember to make that change. I also want to point out that the date here, we just have the year, even though on the reference page we have the month and the day. The in-text citation isn't necessarily going to give your reader all of the information. It's just giving them a breadcrumb to follow to get to the reference page where they'll have this more detailed content. Okay? So what do you do if you don't have a date? That's a pretty common question that students ask, and it's really an easy answer. If you have the N period, D period that shows no date on your reference page, you're going to just translate that same information into the in-text citation. So we have a parenthetical reference here with the author's last name and the date, and then I also have a signal phrase where we're actually introducing the author in the text, so we're just putting the date in parentheses. Now, throughout the rest of these examples, because we're going to look at some specific different types and ways that you're using this information, I am going to show you both how to do it with a signal phrase in text, as well as how the in-text citation itself would look at the end if it were put together. It's not going to make a lot of difference to you right now, because right now you're really looking at just how to put that in-text citation at the end of your annotated bibliography entry. But once you start writing the paper, you may want to come back and watch this video again to get that information and to see some different ways to kind of blend the material together. And I will have a separate video that will also talk a little bit more about how to do that. Okay, so let's move on to our next slide with an example of looking at how in-text citations might look with multiple authors. So when you're citing a work with 2 authors, you want to use the word "and" in between the authors' names in the signal phrase. And the signal phrase, again, is your writing in the body of your paper. But when you're doing the in-text citation, you're going to use the ampersand symbol between their names. So you can see in our first example, according to feminist researchers Rate and Tate, then we have our year in parentheses, and then we have our quote and our parenthetical citation for the page. So our information is kind of spread out in that one. But in the bottom one, we just have our direct quote in the text. So some feminist researchers question that women's responses to war have been ignored. In our in-text citation, we have Rate, ampersand Tate, comma, 1997, comma, P period 2. So that's letting us know it's on page 2 of the Rate and Tate piece that was published in 1997. So we have all the information we need there to go to the reference page, and then from the reference page to go find that source. Now, what if you have more than 2 authors? When you're citing a work with 3 to 5 authors, okay, so this is 3, 4, and 5 authors only, the first time you introduce them, you are going to put in all of their names. Okay, so we have Harklaw, Segal, and Lucy, comma, 1999. However, after you've introduced that once, and you've given everybody credit the first time, you can use a shortened, abbreviated version of et al. In the signal phrase or in the parentheses, so both places. And you can see you're using the first author's name, et al., period, comma, 1993. And the AL is abbreviated, so that's why there's a period there. Okay, so it does look a little funny to have the punctuation, period, and a comma right next to each other, but that is correct, and that is how you're going to use the et al. Now, if you have even more authors than that, say you have a work with 6 authors, then you're going to just automatically only use the first author's name and the et al. Okay, so you see the example of using it in a signal phrase, so you will also use et al. In the body of the text, as well as how it looks in the citation. Okay, so that's any work with 6 or more authors. So we've talked about having multiple authors. Well, what about if you're stating a fact or a piece of information that is covering 2 or more works? So more than one thing on your reference page. You're going to order them in the same way they appear on your reference list, which is, of course, typically in alphabetical order. And you're going to use a semicolon to separate them. So we have 2 sources that are saying the same information, and this is actually a good thing to have in a literature review because it's showing that people in the field agree on something. We're going to have each different source. Instead of having separate in-text citations, we're putting them in the same group of parentheses with a semicolon in the middle. Okay. Next, we want to talk a little bit about how to use, and we saw this in our example, but I just want to put a little more information here for you, give you a couple more examples of what to do when you don't have the author. And that's, again, using the title, because that is the first piece of information that you're finding there. Remember, titles of articles and chapters go in quotation marks. Titles of books, reports, websites, larger items will be italicized. So that same rule follows in both when you're writing it in the signal phrase or in the body of the paper, as well as in the in-text citation. Now, we had a question. This is very common to have organizations as your author. And often those organizations are abbreviated. So here's an example of how you would do that. So the first time when you're citing it, you want to go ahead and spell it out. This is the same whether you're doing a signal phrase or a sentence in your paper, as well as in the in-text citation. The only difference is what the parentheses look like. If it's just in your writing and you're going to introduce for the first time that abbreviation, you just use the regular parentheses. If you're introducing it for the first time in the in-text citation, as you can see down here at the last example on the page, then you're going to use the square brackets. And that's just because you're already in the rounded parentheses, so you'll use the square brackets after that. Okay, now we also have some instances where you may have multiple sources published by people with the same last name, even though they have different first names. Our book that we use in class is a great example because it's published by actually people with the same name. We have a senior and a junior. So you would want to kind of show that in the in-text citation so that your reader can differentiate between the different sources on the reference page. And what you do there is you just include the first initial with the last name. So you can see that we have 2 Cashrew authors here. One's first name begins with a B, one begins with a Y. You may also have more than one source published by the same author. And if that's the case, you're going to, on both the reference page as well as in the in-text citation, put a lowercase letter after the date. So if we have 2 sources by Smith that was published in 1998, on the reference page we'll put them alphabetically according to the next piece of information, which is your title. And then we'll give the first one, the first alphabetical one, an A after the 1998, a B after the next one. That way, whenever we have our in-text citations and we put that year, that A or that B will kind of correspond with the source on the reference page so that your reader knows which one you're talking about. Okay, so that's a very specific information. It doesn't happen that often, but it's good to have the information just in case you do come across it. It's also pretty common to get questions about using a source within a source. Okay, so that's called an indirect citation. So this means that you're citing something that someone said in your source. So for example, we're going to look at a source that we are reading written by someone named Foster. Okay, so we read Foster's work. So Foster will be the person to appear on our reference page. However, within Foster's paper, he talks about something that Greg Brown published, and it's really good information, and we want this information. The best thing to do is to try to go out there and find Greg Brown's publication and use it yourself, because you're probably going to be able to find out more about the context of what Brown was saying, as well as just getting additional great research for your paper. But if you can't do that, say we can't find Greg Brown's paper, we have to cite it this way. Then you would have Greg Brown illustrated, and you'll probably want to tell who Greg Brown is at some point, just so he has some credibility. So Greg Brown, a prominent author, or a well-known scholar, or a research scientist, or someone who conducted a study, whatever we can say about him. But we would say Greg Brown illustrated that. But, so it's important that the signal phrase has who's actually saying it, but your in-text citation is matching with your reference page. So Brown is not going to be on your reference page if you weren't able to find his source. You found this out through the Foster article. So we say, as cited in Foster, 2010, P.15. Okay, so you're showing them exactly where to find that information. Okay? And the way that we're showing that we're talking about what Brown said in Foster is including the words as cited in. So as cited in Foster, 2010, and then your page number. Okay, so that can be a little confusing. If you need additional help with that, let me know. I'm happy to look at it with you. So those are all of our different examples. The key things to really take with you are to remember some basics about APA. First of all, remember that APA really values the author's names and the dates of the sources. So those are the pieces of information you're typically finding in the in-text citation. Unless you're doing a direct quote, then you want to do the page number as well. When you're looking at your reference page, if you're confused about what should go in that in-text citation, a good rule of thumb to follow is that it's typically the first two pieces of information, the first two major pieces of information that you're finding. And finally, all the examples here that I've talked about, there are more examples of them on the Purdue OWL's website. They also do cover some things that I didn't talk about here. So it's an excellent idea to go there and check out their examples, look things up there. And if you have questions, of course, get in touch with me. Okay, so that covers all we're going to talk about with our in-text citations and some general APA basics.